welcome to the JTM Community Podcast, where we are building a community that you can bank on. I'm your host, Jason Melvin. If you are watching this, you already know who our guest is, as he's appeared on the podcast a few times before. Today, we will be starting the first of a four-part series. We'll get into that here in just a moment. Of course, if you want to touch base with me for advancement advising, you can do so at j-tm.community. You can also just add a /podcast to that if you're looking for podcast specific info. The podcasts are also there. If you're looking for where to find us on social media, top right hand side of the website, the easiest thing that you can do for your convenience is join the Facebook group. You'll get daily notifications there. Mondays is when a new poll goes live for voting for upcoming topics and episodes, as well as when you get notified that a new episode is available, which is every Monday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Without further ado, we will dive into it. So the four topics that we will be discussing, the first one will be why do we have a fascination with the supernatural? The second will be thanks and giving. The third will be when words and actions do and don't align. And then the fourth is when you feel like you have a flat tire, what's your donut? So these are all kind of holiday inspired, decided by you all. You can see a little bit of Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas, New Year ideologies within there. Without further ado, my friend of the podcast, again, previous guest. So if you enjoy him, Mason Comstock, check out those previous episodes. So let's dive into first one, part one. Each one, you'll see a 30-minute timer pop up, so that'll kind of help us keep on pace, but also will be a time marker for you if you pick up and drop the episodes as we go along. So that part one being, why do you think we have a fascination with the supernatural? I think first and foremost would be defining supernatural. When you think of supernatural, Mace, what do you think of? What does that mean?
So anything that's beyond like our normal observable world, would be my best guess, right? So things that we can see, touch, hear, like those major senses. Anything beyond that, I think, is where we started getting into that supernatural realm.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think for me, the supernatural includes like the ghouls and ghosts and goblins, that vampires that people think of, but also goes beyond that. So for me, faith and religion is also a supernatural thing, because it goes beyond the scope of science, I guess is what I'm going to say. So anything that like bridges that a bit, to me, feels supernatural. Would you agree with that, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So those would, when you start talking about spirituality, death, stuff like that, then absolutely. I think to get to your question, like our fascination with it, that's probably one of the key things, right? So we all have to do two things in this life, which is live and die. So as our lives progress, I think a lot of people that unknown for us, like what does death equate to? That scares a lot of people, right? But we forget that everybody, the billions of people that have come before us, like experience it in some form or fashion. So with it being an unknown like that, I think what we tend to do is look for ways to make that easier for us. So we try to solve and explain and put a human experience on something that could be above and beyond our normal capacity to understand something. And the really intriguing thing about the idea of life beyond death, or the spirituality piece, is there's really not a way to scientifically know that, right? So we either just feel something spiritually, we are connected to a religion or something, but that is just like you can't know a thing. You just have to either believe or not. So very fascinating.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that for sure, especially when it comes to the concept of death, is the idea of to the best of our ability to like understand or believe that there's more after the fact. which I think that's why there's a underlying tone when it comes to even like Halloween. And for a long time, there was a huge fad, and maybe it's still there to a certain degree, of like werewolves, vampires, zombies, right? Is these are all like transformational things. So and they're largely like death related, but it's the idea of being more than what we're all used to, which is human.
Yeah, so you're talking like if my fascination, like if I wanted to be a vampire kind of thing, is
Yeah,
beyond like our scope. Yeah,
or even the idea that that is a possibility. I think, and this is a bit of a jump, but I think it'll make sense for you as well. Is I think that that's why we have the fascination with substance use and abuse, right? And like mind altering substances. It's an experience. It's the idea of a thing that is beyond like our mundane. I think it's also why we have a fascination with celebrities, right? Is that we view them in a life, or living a life, or having like these qualities, these trademarks that is beyond your average Joe, right? It's like this. I guess the idea of a celebrity is a real world supernatural like premise, right? And it evokes like so much fascination. Right now, the lotto's at like $2 billion, right? So it's a similar fascination of like this is a larger than life thing. People's minds start to spin as far as like how their life would transform with like that amount of wealth. Which, let's be honest, when it starts off, I think it's at like 40 million. But we don't have as many people that like play into that, as if $40 million isn't a substantial amount of money, right? It's this very unique thing where the more larger than life a thing becomes, the more like fascinated and like pulled into it that we all become. Um, which I know we're kind of springboarding off the idea of how we originally defined supernatural, because that isn't winning the lottery. Maybe it is. I don't know. Maybe you have better odds to become a vampire than winning the lottery. I'm not sure.
hey, I bought a lottery ticket for the first time in like 20 years, so
Did you
I
really?
get it. Yeah,
So why do you think that is? Because this isn't the first time that it's been um, a significant amount of wealth, right? Because I think we would both agree that $20 million would be a lot of money for the average person. A lot of money.
sure.
So
Yeah,
why do you
yeah.
think now after 20 years?
Why 2 billion? I don't
Yeah.
know. I would call it a social hype. I had this like really
Mm.
good friend that was like, hey, I don't even pay attention to that, but he was like, hey, lottery's up to 1.5 billion. Might as well buy a ticket. I said, all right, Jason, sure, I'll go do that.
It's worth the risk at that point. The $2 is worth the 2 billion.
Yeah, yeah, I didn't care too much. What's $2? I'll waste that on some coffee.
Yeah. It is a
Um,
fascinating thing, and I think which I hadn't thought about previously, is that there is like a social or cultural level to these things also.
sure. So get back to your idea of the transformation and stuff. So I wasn't going in that direction when I was originally thinking, like once you said ghouls and ghosts and stuff.
Mhm.
I actually would pose this question to you. I think that it is more um, like we like things that scare us, especially in today's age, right? That's why we've got scary movies and these ideas of these monsters, but we can do it in a safe way.
Mhm.
So I think if those things were real, like if there was actual goblins running around stealing your children and creating mayhem, then we would have a little bit more reservation to those things.
Mm.
But our like basic nature without all the society and stuff, if you really think about it, like it makes us feel alive, that danger
Mhm.
and surviving something that was more than us. Like that feels great as a human being when you come through that. So when
Mhm.
you even like the basics of just going through a haunted house and getting scared over and over again by the people banging on walls and people chasing after you with the chainsaw, even though it's not real, there's a certain amount of adrenaline that your body dumps into you, like that scary feeling, and then you survive it, and it just feels really good
Sure.
at the back end of it.
Yeah, it's almost an artificial way to induce adrenaline or endorphins within the body. Because even if you watch a scary movie, like it's blatantly not real. Like you're in a room watching a screen, you know you're safe, but your mind will perceive it in such a way that the emotions, the physical feelings you get trumps any sort of logic that you have.
Sure.
It's like watching a zombie movie and then going to bed, and then you think you see movement out in the living room, right? Like you know that's not a thing, but it's the power that being having that experience begins to take on your mind to the point where I mean it's been a thing. I don't know how true it is, but was always a thing that was said as a kid that if you watch that kind of stuff and then you go to bed, right, you're gonna have nightmares, you're gonna have night terrors, right? Um, it's the impact of that. I know you and I have chatted previously about various things. So for me, this falls under the category we're talking about, but I want to get your thoughts in the idea of aliens. Do you feel that it falls under the guise of supernatural, or because it's things that people tend to believe, but we haven't ever experienced proof?
Man, that's a hard one. I would say no, because they would be like actually in the physical world, right? It's just visitors from other celestial beings, celestial planets.
Mm-hmm.
So, in that aspect, I would say no. If it was, so even if you had like some sort of entity that could, let's say, shift between planes of existence, if that was a thing, like think an interdimensional kind of alien, then uh, man, yeah, I wouldn't classify that as supernatural. So I guess really it is for me more about the spirituality of things, like
Okay.
outside the physical existence. Yeah.
The So I'm going to challenge the idea because for us to ever experience any of those things, they would have to be essentially in like our existence.
Right.
So like if vampires were a thing, they would be here. So the moment that they become like an observable thing, does that like disqualify them then from like this idea of supernatural? So once something becomes a science, is it no longer that then?
Yeah. So when we think about, I'm trying to gauge through the vampire conversation. So we'd say they would have supernatural powers, right? Because we're relating them to us. So
Mm-hmm.
they're stronger, like have abilities, if you would, can live forever. Those are beyond like our natural being. So maybe under the same premises, then like an alien that had the ability to do some of that stuff, telekinesis, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Then yeah, I guess we could say those are supernatural powers. I don't know if I'd say that as a supernatural being, but then again, I if they were around and like actually like just lived within our natural world, would we still qualify that as supernatural power, or would that just be a normal thing, right? So
True. Yeah, I think that you made a really good point. Is the moment that the supernatural becomes natural, like normalized, it no longer is like this. It's no longer the unknown, right? Which I think that's probably the thing we're all pulled to. Not all of us, but the fascination people tend to have. It's specifically the unknown. The moment that that thing is known, it's no longer as practical for explaining or having the fascination. So even if we go back to previous religions or faiths, so Norse, and you and I have chatted about this before, the idea of thunder and lightning, right, was largely explained through faith in gods versus now we would understand that we understand the science of electrical discharge, right? So in what you're talking about is that if in our minds right now aliens are these things, so even if they what we determine now to have supernatural abilities, right, telekinesis, right, if that's a thing, but that just becomes part of our everyday life, is no longer supernatural, it's just natural.
yeah, I would agree with that.
So I'm gonna to make a jump with that mindset. So I can't remember what it's called. It's an Elon Musk's one of his companies is developing an implant, right, to allow people to do a whole lot of things, but communication is one of them. So,
Interface with electronics.
yep,
Yeah.
which would include each other if you have like the various implants, right? So if that is a thing, so we would determine. I don't know if that can be considered telekinesis because you would be able to communicate without talking.
Uh, Telepathy, telekinesis, moving stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah, telepathy. If it's done through technology, is it still telepathy? Would that be supernatural, or would that just become like a immediately? It's not super anything. It's just natural.
Yeah, I think once you have the technology and the science behind it, where it's explainable, then it's not supernatural. So
Just
I would,
technology.
yeah, I would not consider that personally like telepathy. Although you're like thinking thoughts to somebody, it's really you are not doing it. It's the machine that's doing it that would be
Mm-hmm.
implanted, right? So
Mm.
that to me is not telepathy. Mm.
Kind of the
But
difference
you
between like Batman and Superman.
sure. But you talk about like there's been so many stories of, let's say, twins that are really close and they're
Yep.
separated by a great distance, and then one can tell when something bad happens to the other one, right? Like there is a realm of like what telepathy and those sorts of things are, which is supernatural to me. Nobody knows why or how that happens. It's
Mm-hmm.
just you're connected somehow, some way, but it's just unexplainable. So I think that's really like being able to explain what those powers are
Mm-hmm.
starts to eliminate its supernatural ability, because then you can
Yeah.
replicate it, reproduce it, and it becomes just normalized.
Yeah, I think that that same thing applies to a degree about intuition, right? It's you know a thing, but you don't know why you know a thing. And for example, like a mother's to or intuition, which is kind of like a societal like understanding, that there's like an element of that, but we don't know why or what or like what part of that um is a thing. But it's that idea of uh intuition where you know but you don't know why you know. If somebody said, well, how do you know that, you can never explain it.
Right.
The as we talk about this idea of supernatural, what is an example of something that we've now defined as supernatural that you had experienced or believed in or been a part of at some point? For me, that like I immediately think of the huge era of the vampire movies. So Underworld, Queen of the Damned, the Vampire Lestat, like all of that. I can't remember. I was probably like somewhere around 10 to 15. Probably was like the biggest part. I might have that way off. In my head, I was around around that age. It was probably a bigger span. But there were
Interview with the Vampire.
yeah, Interview with the Vampire. Yep, which they recently remade. I have not watched it yet though. Is like that became like a cultural movement, and then it happened again, zombie related, with when The Walking Dead got huge. So this all, as I'm talking about this, I think it's giving more validity to what you said earlier when you referenced the cultural element. Because I don't think I would have one experienced it or two been intrigued by it had those things not become like popularized.
Yeah. Yeah, social movements for sure. But like really fascinating is like I haven't done a lot of research, but where the uh can you still hear me all right?
Yep.
Sorry, I'm getting a call.
Your phone flashed, so I knew something was happening.
Is the origin of these things, right? So like where does the origin of a zombie, the idea of a zombie come from? How long has that been around? How
Mm-hmm.
many different cultures? Because if you trace a lot of these stories and things back to when science wasn't really a thing, could it be that somebody had a medical condition and you don't know, they couldn't figure out why this person's falling apart, and like their body pieces are falling apart, and they're just like, wow, he must be like dead, right? But he really just has like a medical condition,
Sure.
that are causing him.
Something, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right. So at some point, we as humans with diseases and other things, we go, oh man, like I have no idea what's happening. But then nowadays we can explain a lot of that stuff, so it's turned more into myth and story time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm thinking of like sometimes in like Western movies, you'll see somebody get shot, but then they'll wake up like they'll be perceived as dead, but then they'll wake up, 20 minutes later through the movie. Which, if you take the mindset of being in that era, that would be a little frightening. Like you were dead, right? Um,
Yeah, there's man, I don't remember what the name of them, what it was called, but they used to literally put bells above graves so that people if they wake up because they thought they were dead, but
they'd have a rope in their hand.
Yep. Yeah, there's a funny name for it, but that's like where we get some of the stuff of what we call it, and it's just, oh, that's interesting when you look into like the origins of that stuff. But so like somebody gets hit on the head and they're like unconscious and they really didn't know back then, like, oh yeah, heart rate, respiratory, all that stuff. And they would just be like, oh, this person's dead, he's been in a coma for like 2 days, right? That they think, oh, he's dead, and then so they bury him. That's what you do with dead people. And then yeah, it becomes oh, now he's alive and he's returned from the grave. Is that a zombie or is that a vampire? Like, what is that? You know what I mean? But
yeah.
So maybe there are stories about how people try to explain some of that stuff without knowing the science behind it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can you think of a moment in your life, whether past or present, that you had some degree of fascination with what you've determined to be the supernatural?
Yeah, so I personally really like the idea of being connected universally, right? So I think things like astral projection or connecting with the universe at a larger level, even if you could explain that with science and talking like quantum mechanics and stuff like that, I really think that there's more if we took the time to actually understand and try to be a part of the universe that we're in, that we could potentially figure some of that stuff out. But a lot of times I don't think we really take the time to do that. So
yeah, it definitely has to happen at a slower pace. We tend to be so distracted with like what's kind of like right in front of us, and the lives we live, it's the culture we're in that tend to be more distracting than anything. Shit, people tend to be so involved in like social media and on their phones that they literally won't see what's right next to them.
Literally walk out into moving traffic, right?
Yeah, I was picking on Tracy yesterday because we were chatting, or I thought we were chatting, and then I realized she was on her phone, so I started talking loud, and I'm just a couple of feet away from her, and I was like, and I literally said her name, and then I was like, babe, and she was like, what? She was like, I thought you were playing with the cat. And in my head, I'm laughing because the cat's name's not Tracy. Right? But it's like that level of fascination, which to me has always been a weird thing. And I know a lot of people, I know you've talked about it with the TV, that if you sit down, like the TV will like literally like tunnel vision you into what you're watching. That's not a thing that I've like ever experienced. I shouldn't, the closer to that I get, so if like I'm watching a good movie and like that it becomes like a focal point, that feels engaging. But like it from what I can recall, I've never had a moment where like the world fades around me kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean that is a problem of mine, but I know that too. So I could literally, it won't even be a show or something that I care about or watch, but like if there is a TV on the room, it will constantly pull my attention. It's almost just like for me, like that external sensory. I'm not really interested in what's on there, but it's something that I have to like start dividing my attention to see if it's something that I need to pay attention to, I guess would be the best way to explain it. So
yeah, it's like
I just try to eliminate. Yeah, I just try to eliminate those distractions when I need to. Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, it is too much things start to irritate me because I think my mind's naturally not trying to pay attention, but I'm also not good at like tuning things out. So many times, especially with little ones, I love kids, so that's not a thing. Um, but parents will say, "Oh, like my sister, especially when Josiah was little, if he was like going on and on and on about something, Tasha could tune it out. For me, it just starts like slowly eating at me, right?
Yeah.
Like
I was gonna
don't
say
have that.
just have some kids and you'll hone that skill really fast when you're like it's around you and part of your world all the time. You're like,
Just
nah,
the noise. You just get
the
used to it.
noise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which and the flip side of that, especially working with clients and clients where their kids are transitioning either from like elementary to middle, middle to high, or high to college, is that the various the farther the gap between the child and the parent, they start to miss the things that used to bother them. So just like the racket, the noise, right? The silence itself becomes like damaging. It's kind of part of empty nesting for parents when they start to struggle. It's just that the silence that was never there before becomes like a detriment. Though in the moment, the parents often are wanting like the idea of peace, right? Like there's a element or a level that's like I can't wait for this thing. But once that happens, it's almost foreign in its own way. As we were excuse me, as we were chatting, I was looking up a few different things for like origin stories, and I did specifically zombies because that's not one I knew of, but I thought it would have something to do with like Haitian culture, and the idea of like possession, and which is a little bit different. It's not how we most people like would think of it, or the idea of like voodoo and those kinds of things, which is essentially kind of where it seems originated. Again, probably with a different connotation or context than what we think of it as, uh, but it's kind of where it had started. So I wanted, in the next 5 minutes, kind of jump to the holiday that just passed, which is Halloween. So I know different cultures have different ideologies or celebrations of the dead, such as Day of the Dead, as an example. What do you think the modern meaning for America is when it comes to Halloween? What does Halloween mean to people?
Nowadays,
Yeah,
getting candy from people.
it's a day of celebration.
I don't think kids realize that either,
Mm-hmm.
or parents really. Like, I mean, we get to dress up, have some fun,
And that's what I mean.
go around. So yeah, that social aspect of it can be considered fun, or I guess so. But usually, when you're celebrating something, you should know what you're celebrating, right? So
Fair.
what you're talking before the Day of the Dead, that is literally celebrating a person's life, um,
Yep.
how their life went, and like what they meant to you, and celebrating their, I shouldn't say their death, but that they passed on. So
Sure.
yeah, I don't think the in America the normal like meaning of Halloween is that, and that I'm sure All Hallows Eve got its foundation in like our early colonies and
Mm-hmm.
like them trying to explain some supernatural stuff as well. But yeah, I don't think most people relate the two anymore.
Yeah, where it's disconnected. Yeah, as you were talking about that, I had looked up where it originally comes from, which is was a Celtic festival, um, which kind of explains. But the idea is was a pagan religious celebration where people would do like the Halloween things, but it was to ward off ghosts. So it had again that spiritual or that supernatural, like spiritual element to that. The which based on our conversation and observation, where that Americans at a higher rate had been like transitioning from like Christian faith beliefs, yet so many of folks will still celebrate Christmas. Why do you think that is? Would you say it's the same reason that folks celebrate like Halloween?
Yeah, I think that's more known of like why Christmas is there, but I think for most families, especially if they don't practice actual Christianity or Catholicism, they don't do those things with the spiritual piece of it or the religious piece of it in mind. They're just doing it as a way of giving gifts to people, showing them that they love them and that they care about them, and coming together as family. I think that means more to people than that, and not everybody, of course, but
Sure, yeah.
But same thing. I think that as people, you're right. As people are getting away from the original meaning and intent, like you're still latching on to the traditional action. You just don't have the appropriate reasoning behind it.
Yeah, I wonder if it is kind of like a natural evolution of things where the meanings begin to like segregate a little bit. The difference between like a faith-oriented approach to a thing versus a cultural approach to a thing, but the traditions, elements of traditions, still maintain. It just begins to look different, as I'm sure it looks different now than it would of 200 years ago.
Absolutely.
Have
All
you
right. So, hey, real quick, last question. We only got a minute left. If you were to have a supernatural power, what would it be?
Oh, I'm gonna cop out and ask a question in return. Is it a thing I can turn on and off?
Uh, yeah, you could control it. Sure, why
Okay.
not?
Is the ability to read minds?
Ooh, gross. I don't want to get in anybody's head.
But I have to be able to turn it on and off. If I can't control it, I don't want it. That'd probably be the worst thing to have.
So you're thinking Mel Gibson, What Women Want scenario?
Uh, yes and no. So, given what I do for an occupation, in the ability to know truth, right, is where it would come from. How about you? Same question.
I want to fly. I gotta fly. Be a bird.
Be a bird. So, what in a supernatural kind of way? What is flying? What does flying look like? Are you like flapping your arms? Is it Superman style?
Superman style, yeah.
Okay.
Defying gravity.
Because in so many like journeys where people are granted like that specific thing, right? It's almost like a Loki approach where you're granted the thing, but it comes with all of these other things you didn't think of.
Yeah. Sounds great.
Thank you so much, Mace, for joining me for this long conversation. Again, covering part one, which was the idea of why do you think that we're fascinated with the supernatural, into part two, which was the idea of thanks and giving, followed by part three, which is one world or one words and actions do and don't align, and then finishing this up with part four of when you have a flat tire, what is your donut? And
always a pleasure, Jason.
of course, anyone who is tuning in, if you want to touch base with me, you can do so at j-tm.community. If you want podcast specific stuff, just add a /podcast to that. If you are looking for resources both nationwide or in the Mount Pleasant, Michigan area, you can also find those on the website under community partners. And most importantly, thanks for tuning in and for being part of a community where you belong.